In Shia Islam, lineage holds profound spiritual significance. Central to this is the belief in the Al-Bayt, the family of Prophet Muhammad, especially through his daughter Fatima and Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's cousin and the first Shia Imam. Each of the 12 Imams is believed to inherit both spiritual authority and legitimacy through this direct descent. Understanding Ayatollah Khomeini's family line begins with this sacred root. Prophet Muhammad, d. 632 CE, married Fatima bint Muhammad and fathered Imam Hussein. The lineage proceeds through Hussein, Zain al-Abidin, al-Baqir, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, the sixth Imam, and foundational figure in the Twelver Shia tradition. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was not only a revered religious leader within Shi'ism, but also profoundly influential in the broader Islamic intellectual milieu. He developed Fiqh Jafari, the Jafari school of Shia jurisprudence, attracted many Sunni and Shia students, laying foundations for future Islamic sciences. Saw persecution from Abbasid caliphs, notably al-Mansur and al-Mahdi. Most historians agree he was likely poisoned around 765 CE. Importantly, after his death, a schism emerged. Ismailis followed his eldest son Ismail and became prominent in movements like the Fatimid Caliphate. The dominant Twelver Shia lineage continued via his other son, Imam Musa al-Kadhim, the seventh Imam in this line. Imam Musa al-Kadhim, 745 to 799 CE, lived through the reigns of 4 Abbasid caliphs and endured repeated imprisonment, using his time to guide and teach a network of followers across the Islamic world. Many scholars believe he too was poisoned under the orders of Harun al-Rashid, dying in Baghdad in 799 CE. The Twelver Imamate officially continued through Musa's eldest son, Ali al-Rida, but Khomeini's lineage branches from another son. Hamza ibn Musa, a lesser-known but deeply pious figure revered for scholarship and moral standing. Hamza was reportedly killed on a journey by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun, who perceived him as a potential threat. Hamza's line persisted through his son Sayyid Haidar, who, following the spiritual tradition, made significant contributions in Nishapur, ancient Khorasan province, northeast Iran. Over centuries, the family remained there until we arrive at Din Ali Shah, who lived around the late 18th century. He bore the family's scholarly and spiritual legacy and represents a transitional figure in their migratory history. Toward the end of the 18th century, a wave of Persian scholars migrated to Awadh, Oudh, in northern India, then ruled by Shia Nawabs, who actively promoted Islamic learning. Scholars from Khorasan, including Din Ali Shah, relocated to the Kintur-Lucknow region in Uttar Pradesh, welcomed in a flourishing Shia intellectual environment. This migration was motivated by both invitations to serve as religious leaders and the relative instability of post-Mughal Persia. From a historical standpoint, this move represents a key intersection of religious patronage, cross-regional scholarship, and identity preservation, as the family began to be identified with the Hindi Nisba, marking their Indian association. In Kintur, Sayyid Ahmad Musavi Hindi, the son of Din Ali Shah, grew into a respected scholar. Born circa 1800, he embodied the syncretic tradition of Persian and Indian Shia thought. The surname Hindi signaled the family's recent sojourn in India, a geographical nisba, yet carried forward even after they relocated again. In 1830, amidst growing British colonial pressure, Ahmad Musavi decided to join the sacred seminary city of Najaf in Ottoman Iraq, home to the shrine of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. After years, 1834 to 1839, of religious study and service in Najaf, he migrated permanently to his ancestral homeland in Khomeini, Iran, carrying forward the Hindi legacy, now interwoven with Persian identity. In our first chapter, we trace the delicate threads of ancestry, from Prophet Muhammad to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, from Imam Musa to Hamza, and from Nishapur's scholars to Awad's distinguished circles. We saw how the title Hindi was adopted as a mark of new intellectual identity. Now this tale deepens. Part 2 begins by exploring the bold leap of Hamza bin Musa himself, a man whose spiritual integrity and scholarly influence made him both beloved and feared, and whose martyrdom would echo through generations. The branch of Hamza bin Musa, the lineage of Ayatollah Khomeini. In the previous part, we traced Ayatollah Khomeini's sacred ancestry, a line stretching from Prophet Muhammad through Imam Hussein, Zain al-Abidin, Muhammad al-Baqir, and Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, the sixth Imam of the Shia faith. But Imam Jafar's death in 765 CE split his followers and descendants into paths that would shape Shia Islam for centuries. While the dominant Twelver line continued through Imam Musa al-Kadhim's eldest son, Ali al-Rida, another quieter yet significant branch descended from another of Imam Musa's sons, Hamza ibn Musa, a pious scholar, a revered figure, and the ancestor of the Musavi Hindi line that would ultimately give rise to Ayatollah Khomeini. Hamza ibn Musa was born in Medina during the late 8th century, in a period when the Abbasid Caliphate was at its peak, but viewed the family of the Prophet, the al-Bayt, with deep suspicion. Like his brothers, including the more famous Ali al-Rida, Hamza inherited a reputation for deep learning, piety, and closeness to the people. He became known as a scholar who combined legal knowledge with mystical devotion, attracting followers across Khorasan and beyond. However, Hamza's rising popularity alarmed the Abbasid rulers, particularly Caliph al-Mamun. Though Hamza was not a political agitator, his very connection to the Prophet's lineage and his widespread respect were seen as threats to the caliph's control over Shia communities. During a journey through Khorasan, Hamza was intercepted by Abbasid forces. Historical accounts differ, but most sources agree he was martyred on al-Mamun's orders. His death meant to break the growing influence of the al-Bayt in the region. Despite this tragedy, Hamza's memory became a source of inspiration for his descendants. His shrine and name continued to be honored, particularly among Shia scholars who viewed him as a symbol of steadfast faith. After Hamza's martyrdom, his line was carried forward by his son Sayyid Haidar, who settled in Nishapur, an important cultural and spiritual hub in the Khorasan region, in today's northeastern Iran. Nishapur at that time was a crossroads of Persian, Arab, and Central Asian traditions, home to scholars, Sufis, and poets. Sayyid Haidar became part of this intellectual climate, ensuring that Hamza's lineage not only survived but flourished. For generations, Hamza's descendants remained in Nishapur, serving as scholars, jurists, and community leaders. They became respected as custodians of Shia learning, holding positions in local religious schools and circles. This continuity of scholarship, from Hamza to Haidar and onward, built a legacy of intellectual and spiritual leadership that set the stage for later migrations and transformations. By the late 18th century, Persia, Iran, was facing political instability under the Qajar dynasty. Tribal conflicts, economic hardship, and foreign pressures made life uncertain, especially in the Khorasan region. It was during this period that Din Ali Shah, a later descendant of Sayyid Haider, decided to lead his family out of Nishapur. The destination was Awadh, Oudh, a Shia-ruled region in northern India in what is now Uttar Pradesh. The Nawabs of Awadh, themselves devout Shia rulers, actively invited Persian scholars and clerics to settle in their territory. They were building Lucknow and its surroundings into a vibrant center of Shia culture, with grand mosques, seminaries, and courts that welcomed theologians, poets, and jurists from across the Persianate world. Din Ali Shah and his family were part of this migration, settling in the village of Kintur, near Lucknow. Here they integrated into Awadh's growing Shia scholarly elite, teaching, preaching, and maintaining their ancestral traditions. It was in Kintur that the family adopted the nisba, or title, Hindi, literally meaning the Indian. This was a common practice among scholars and families to signify their place of residence or origin. Though they were originally from Nishapur, the family would proudly carry the title Hindi for generations, even after they left India. This name symbolized not just geography, but also a new chapter in their identity. Living in India exposed them to a broader, more diverse Shia world, where Persian and Indian traditions blended. This experience would later shape the worldview of Ahmad Musavi, Din Ali Shah's son, and through him influence Ruhollah Khomeini himself. Din Ali Shah's son, Ahmad Musavi, was born in Kintur in the early 19th century. Like his ancestors, he pursued religious scholarship, becoming well-versed in Islamic law and theology. But in 1830, the political landscape of Awadh changed. British colonial expansion was eroding the independence of the Shia Nawabs. For Ahmad, the prospect of living under colonial rule was unacceptable. Seeking a life closer to the heart of Shia scholarship, he left India. His first stop was Najaf in Ottoman Iraq, home to the shrine of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib and one of the most important centers for Shia learning. After several years of study and spiritual service in Najaf, Ahmad eventually moved again, this time to Khomeini in Iran, where he settled permanently. Even as he integrated into Iranian society, Ahmad continued to use Hindi as part of his name, honoring his family's years in India. Ahmad's son, Mustafa Musavi, was born in 1862 in Khomeini. Like his forefathers, Mustafa was a scholar and community leader, known for his fearless opposition to local tyranny and oppression. His home became a refuge for the oppressed, a trait that would deeply influence his son, Ruhollah. But this defiance came at a cost. On February 13, 1903, when Ruhollah was just a toddler, Mustafa was assassinated by local rivals, likely with the support of political authorities who saw him as a threat. His death would leave a profound mark on the young Khomeini, shaping his understanding of justice, courage, and resistance. This branch of Imam Musa's descendants, through Hamza ibn Musa, Sayyid Haider, Din Ali Shah, Ahmad Hindi, and Mustafa Musavi, carried with it more than just a bloodline. It preserved a legacy of scholarship, spiritual resilience, and resistance. The family's migrations, from Medina to Khorasan, from Nishapur to Awad, from India to Najaf, and finally to Khomeini, created a lineage that was deeply rooted in the global Shia experience. These movements exposed the family to diverse traditions, struggles, and communities, forging a worldview that combined intellectual depth with a sense of defiance against oppression. This legacy would find its fullest expression in Ruhollah Khomeini, who would rise from this lineage to lead the Islamic Revolution of 1979, shaping Iran's destiny and leaving a lasting imprint on the Muslim world. From India to Iran, the final steps toward Khomeini. In the previous chapter, we followed the Musavi Hindi family through centuries of migration, from Medina to Khorasan, from Nishapur to the Shia-ruled lands of Awad in northern India. Shah and his descendants embraced a new identity, proudly carrying the title Hindi as a marker of their Indian connection. Now part 3 brings us to the last 2 generations before Ruhollah Khomeini himself, the journey of Ahmad Musavi Hindi, his departure from colonial India, his years of learning in Najaf, and his permanent settlement in Khomeini, Iran. From him came Mustafa Musavi, Khomeini's father, whose life and tragic death would shape the future supreme leader's destiny. Ahmad Musavi, the son of Din Ali Shah, was born in Kintur near Lucknow in the early 1800s. Like his forefathers, Ahmad was deeply committed to Islamic scholarship. He studied theology, jurisprudence, and Arabic literature, earning respect among the Shia clerical circles of Awad. But by 1830, the Nawabs of Awad, who had once been generous patrons of Persian scholars, were losing their autonomy to the expanding British colonial power. For Ahmad, living under foreign rule was unacceptable. He believed his family's future and his own calling as a scholar could only thrive in lands free from colonial domination. So, with his family, he left India, a decision that would permanently reshape the Musavi Hindi legacy. Ahmad's first destination was Najaf in Ottoman Iraq, a city revered by Shia Muslims. Najaf was home to the shrine of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, a sacred center of pilgrimage and a leading seat of Shia learning. There Ahmad continued his studies and taught within the seminary community, connecting with scholars from across the Muslim world. His years in Najaf deepened his spiritual ties to the Al-Bayt and reinforced the family's reputation as religious leaders. By the mid-1830s, Ahmad chose to relocate once again, this time to Khomeini, a small town in central Iran. It was here that the family would finally put down permanent roots. Though Ahmad was now geographically far from India, he continued to proudly sign his name as Ahmad Musavi Hindi, keeping the Indian chapter of his family history alive. In Khomeini, Ahmad married Sakina bint Hassan, the sister of his close friend Yusuf Khan. Together, they had several children, including a son named Mustafa Musavi, the man who would become the father of Ruhollah Khomeini. Ahmad lived the rest of his life in Khomeini as a respected scholar and community elder, his household serving as a center for learning and spiritual guidance. Mustafa Musavi was born in 1862 in Khomeini, raised in a home rich with scholarship and piety. Like his father and ancestors, Mustafa became a cleric, respected for his knowledge of Islamic law and his fearless nature. He was known not just as a teacher but as a protector, someone who would speak out against local tyrants and corrupt officials. Mustafa's home became a refuge for those oppressed by landlords and tribal rulers. This courage, however, earned him powerful enemies. On February 13, 1903, when his youngest son Ruhollah was only 2 years old, Mustafa was assassinated, reportedly on the orders of local authorities who saw him as a threat. His murder left a lasting wound in the Musavi Hindi family, and it deeply affected young Ruhollah, who grew up with stories of his father's bravery and martyrdom. Born on May 17, 1900, or September 24, 1902 by some accounts, in Khomeini, Ruhollah was the youngest of Mustafa's children. After his father's death, he was raised by his mother and elder siblings, particularly his brother Sayyid Mortaza Pasandida, who became a father figure and mentor. From an early age, Ruhollah was immersed in the Quran, Arabic, and the traditions of Islamic jurisprudence. His family's long history of scholarship and resistance deeply influenced him. The stories of Hamza ibn Musa's martyrdom, Sayyid Haidar's scholarship, Din Ali Shah's migration, Ahmad Hindi's devotion, and Mustafa Musavi's courage created a powerful narrative of faith and defiance in his young mind. By the time Ruhollah Khomeini began his formal studies as a cleric, he was more than just a young scholar. He was the heir to a multi-generational legacy, a lineage of saints, martyrs, and intellectuals who had journeyed across continents, endured persecution, and preserved their devotion to the Al-Bayt. This heritage gave Khomeini both his spiritual legitimacy and his unyielding character. It helped him inspire millions when he later opposed the Pahlavi dynasty and led the Islamic Revolution of 1979, establishing the Islamic Republic of Iran. From Hamza ibn Musa's sacrifice in Khorasan to Sayyid Haidar's learning in Nishapur, from Din Ali Shah's migration to India to Ahmad Musavi's devotion in Najaf and Khomeini, and finally to Mustafa Musavi's martyrdom, each generation built the foundation for Ruhollah Khomeini's rise. This journey across time and geography was not just a tale of bloodline. It was a story of resilience, learning, and a commitment to justice, traits that would define Iran's first supreme leader and echo through the Islamic world. As we close the chapter on Part 3, chronicling how Ahmad Musavi Hindi carried his family's sacred lineage from India to Najaf, and how Mustafa Musavi's courageous martyrdom shaped the young Ruhollah, it's time to explore the pivotal moment when the Musavi Hindi legacy ascends once more. In Part 4, we turn our gaze to Ahmad Musavi Hindi himself, Ruhollah Khomeini's grandfather, whose spiritual journey and personal convictions would chart a course for his descendants, and ultimately set in motion the revolutionary path of Iran's supreme leader. In the sweeping story of the Musavi Hindi family, Ahmad Musavi Hindi stands as a figure of quiet strength and spiritual leadership. He was the bridge between his family's centuries-long journey, from Arabia to Khorasan, from Nishapur to the Shia-ruled lands of Awadh in India, and the new life they would build in Iran. More than a scholar, Ahmad Musavi Hindi was the man who carried his family's sacred legacy through turbulent times, ensuring that the seeds of knowledge, faith, and resistance would pass on to his children and grandchildren. These seeds would eventually blossom in Ruhollah Khomeini, the man who would lead a revolution and reshape Iran. Ahmad Musavi was born in the early 1800s in Kintur, a village near Lucknow, in present-day Uttar Pradesh, India. His father, Din Ali Shah, had migrated from Nishapur in northeastern Iran during the late 18th century, seeking refuge from unrest in Persia and opportunities in Awad, which was then a flourishing Shia cultural center. In Awad, Persian clerics and scholars were welcomed by the Nawabs, who were themselves Shia rulers. The region boasted seminaries, libraries, and courts that attracted theologians from across the Persian and Mughal worlds. Ahmad grew up immersed in this environment, studying Arabic, Persian, Quranic exegesis, and Islamic jurisprudence. His teachers were scholars who blended Persian traditions with Indian Shia thought, giving him a broad intellectual foundation. From a young age, Ahmad was respected for his calm demeanor, his clarity of speech, and his dedication to serving his community. By the time Ahmad reached adulthood, the Nawabs of Awad were rapidly losing power. The British East India Company had begun asserting dominance, and by 1830, Awad was essentially a puppet state under colonial control. For a family like the Musavi Hindis, who valued independence and saw themselves as guardians of Islamic learning, this was more than a political change. It was a moral crisis. Ahmad believed his family could not thrive under a foreign, non-Muslim power that restricted religious authority and undermined local governance. In 1830, Ahmad made a pivotal decision. He would leave India. He chose to uproot his family, not out of convenience, but out of a desire to protect their spiritual and intellectual freedom. This decision would change the course of his descendants' history. Ahmad's first destination was Najaf, in present-day Iraq, then part of the Ottoman Empire. Najaf was and remains one of the holiest cities in Shia Islam. It is home to the shrine of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, the first Imam, and a hub for scholars from across the Muslim world. Here Ahmad immersed himself in study and teaching, joining the vibrant network of clerics, jurists, and students who made Najaf a beacon of Shia learning. He attended classes with renowned scholars, studied advanced Islamic law, and participated in theological debates that shaped the ideas of his era. Najaf also offered Ahmad something India could not: a community free from colonial interference, where Shia traditions were preserved and respected. These years deepened his understanding of the spiritual mission his family carried and strengthened his resolve to pass this legacy forward. By the mid-1830s, Ahmad made one final migration, this time to Khorasan, a modest town in central Iran. The decision to settle here was both practical and spiritual. Khorasan offered a stable environment where Ahmad could raise his family, serve the community, and continue his scholarly work. Even as he integrated into Iranian society, Ahmad never abandoned his Indian connection. He continued to use the title Hindi as part of his name, a nod to the chapter of his family's history in Awad. To the people of Khorasan, Ahmad became both a religious leader and a cultural bridge, bringing with him the intellectual richness of India and the spiritual authority of Najaf. Ahmad married Sakina bint Hassan, the sister of his friend Yusuf Khan, and together they had several children, including Mustafa Musavi, who would become the father of Ruhollah Khomeini. Ahmad's home became a center of religious study and community service, a place where faith and knowledge intertwined. Ahmad Musavi Hindi passed down more than a name. He gave his children and grandchildren a living legacy, a dedication to scholarship, a fearless commitment to justice, and a deep love for the al-Bayt, the family of the Prophet. His life story, migration, learning, and leadership became part of the family narrative that shaped Ruhollah Khomeini's worldview. Through Ahmad, the Musavi Hindi family carried with them the influences of three worlds: the spiritual depth of Najaf, where Shia scholarship thrived; the cultural diversity of India, where Persian and Indian Islamic traditions blended; the resilience of Iran, where they would eventually stand at the center of political and spiritual transformation. Though Ahmad himself never lived to see the monumental events his grandson would lead, his choices laid the foundation for them. By leaving India, settling in Najaf, and anchoring the family in Khomeini, he ensured that the Musavi Hindi line remained independent, respected, and deeply connected to the global Shia tradition. His influence lived on in his son Mustafa's courage, and ultimately in Ruhollah Khomeini's resolve to challenge tyranny and lead Iran through one of the most dramatic revolutions of the 20th century. Ahmad Musavi. Hindi may not have raised a sword or led a protest, but his spiritual leadership and steadfast character were the quiet forces that kept his lineage alive, vibrant, and ready for the challenges to come. In the storied journey of the Musavi Hindi lineage, Mustafa Musavi represents a unique confluence of tradition, faith, and justice. Born in the small town of Khomeini in 1862, Mustafa inherited a rich legacy from his father, Ahmad Musavi Hindi, whose life carried the family from India through Najaf to Iran. Raised amid scholarship and spiritual devotion, Mustafa came of age in an era where tribal tyranny and unjust landlords oppressed ordinary Iranians. Against this backdrop, he emerged as both a religious authority and a voice for the oppressed. From childhood, Mustafa devoted himself to religious education, mastering Arabic, Quranic exegesis, and Islamic law. He assisted his father in teachings and studied under local scholars in Khomeini. As a trusted cleric, he led congregations, delivered sermons, and defended the rights of common people, often at personal risk. His moral clarity and refusal to stay silent in the face of social injustices, be it against dispossessed peasants or peasants stripped of their lands by middlemen, won him admiration and enemies in equal measure. A devout teacher by day and a community advocate by conviction, Mustafa embodied the Musavi Hindi spirit, faith without fear. But in 19th century rural Iran, standing up for the powerless was a dangerous act. Mustafa's outspoken sermons began to challenge the local feudal lords, who relied on coercion and wealth to control the populace. His popularity made them uncomfortable. They issued warnings, called him troublemaker. For Mustafa, silence was impossible. Justice was his guiding light. Each sermon, each lesson, reaffirmed the family's motto: faith is courage. But courage can be lethal where authority feels threatened. On February 13th, 1903, when Mustafa's youngest child, Ruhollah, was just over 1 year old, tragedy struck. He was lured away from the safety of his home under false pretenses, then ambushed and assassinated, likely by agents loyal to the landlords who saw him as a threat. His murder was more than a personal loss. It was a symbolic act aimed at silencing dissent. But his death sparked outrage, confirmed the cruelty of the ruling class, and turned a local cleric into a martyr of justice. The loss of his father at such a tender age left an indelible mark on young Ruhollah. Raised by his mother and elder siblings, particularly his brother Morteza, Ruhollah grew up steeped in stories of Mustafa's courage. These reassurances reinforced his spiritual resolve and planted the seeds of resistance deep within his heart. Mustafa's life and death became the first lesson in moral duty for his son, namely that faith demands action, not passivity. Mustafa Musavi never held political office, nor did he lead armies. Yet his bravery and sacrifice became the moral compass for a new generation of leaders. Among his children, Morteza Pasandide, a scholar and poet, Nur al-Din Hindi, a preacher at the famed shrine of Abbas, and most significantly, Ruhollah, who inherited not only religious authority, but also an uncompromising sense of justice. Historians agree, Mustafa's martyrdom shaped the consciousness of Iran's future supreme leader, embedding moral courage into the core of the Islamic Revolution. Mustafa's sacrifice was the link between past and future, a testament that faith without justice is hollow. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this legacy shaped Ruhollah Khomeini as a child, scholar, and ultimately as a revolutionary. From the seeds of his father's martyrdom grew a movement that would transform Iran and resonate across the Islamic world. In the modest town of Khomein, nestled among the plains of central Iran, a child was born whose name would one day echo through history. Ruhollah Musavi Khomeini came into the world on May 17, 1900, though some records list his birth as September 24, 1902. From the very beginning, his life was marked by tragedy. His father, Mustafa Musavi, a courageous cleric and a defender of the oppressed, had dared to challenge the local feudal lords who preyed upon ordinary people. Mustafa's sermons, rich with calls for justice, earned him admiration from the poor and enmity from the powerful. On February 13, 1903, when Ruhollah was scarcely more than a year old, Mustafa was assassinated, ambushed by agents believed to be working on behalf of those very landlords he had condemned. The loss of his father left a scar on the infant's life that would never fully heal. It was more than a personal tragedy. It became the defining wound that would shape his understanding of justice, oppression, and the duty to resist tyranny. In the wake of Mustafa's death, the task of raising Ruhollah and his siblings fell to his mother, Khadijeh Saqafi, and his elder brother, Morteza Pasandide, a budding scholar himself. Their household became both a sanctuary and a school. While grief hung heavy, it was not despair that filled the young boy's days. Instead, there was learning, recitation, and discipline. Khadijeh, a woman of resilience and quiet wisdom, ensured that her son was steeped in the moral fabric of his lineage. She told him stories of his father's courage, his grandfather Ahmad Musavi Hindi, who had crossed continents to preserve his family's freedom, and the deeper ancestry that traced back to Hamza ibn Musa, a martyred son of the 7th Shia Imam. These tales weren't just bedtime stories, they were lessons about identity and duty. Morteza, acting as a mentor, guided Ruhollah's intellectual growth. Under his brother's supervision, the boy memorized the Quran by the age of 7, mastered the basics of Arabic grammar and logic, and began to study Persian poetry, learning from works that blended spirituality with a longing for justice. Khomeini itself was a small but vibrant community. Life revolved around the mosque, the family home, and the rhythms of the seasons. The Mousavi household was respected, not for wealth, but for its piety and generosity. Neighbors came to Khadijeh for advice, to Morteza for teachings, and to young Ruhollah for the promise they saw in his eager eyes. By his teenage years, it was clear that Ruhollah was destined for more than life in a provincial town. The Mousavi Hindi lineage had produced scholars and spiritual guides for generations, and now it was his turn to follow that path. At the age of 16, he left Khomeini for Arak, where he studied under Sheikh Abdul Karim Hairi Yazdi, a respected scholar who recognized the young man's intellectual potential. The journey was not easy. Travel in early 20th century Iran was slow and sometimes dangerous, but it was a rite of passage for those pursuing the sacred sciences. In Iraq, and later in the holy city of Qom, Ruhollah delved into the Islamic sciences, jurisprudence, fiqh, theology, kalam, ethics, akhlaq, and logic, mantiq. His studies were rigorous, often lasting from dawn until deep into the night, punctuated by hours of reflection and prayer. His teachers marveled at his ability to grasp complex ideas and translate them into clear, practical guidance for others. In Qom, he found himself among some of the most influential scholars of the age. Here his reputation began to grow, not only as a serious student, but as a man deeply committed to the idea that religion must serve the people. He absorbed lessons from his instructors, but also began to develop his own voice, one that fused traditional Shia scholarship with a vision of active moral leadership. By the time he reached adulthood, Ruhollah had become more than a student. He was now a teacher, a writer, and an interpreter of Shia thought. Over the course of his life, he would author nearly 40 books, ranging from commentaries on Islamic law to meditations on ethics, philosophy, and governance. His writing style was distinctive. While rooted firmly in tradition, it was clear, accessible, and aimed at ordinary believers as much as fellow scholars. Works like Tahrir al-Wasila and Kashf al-Asrar reflected not only his deep knowledge but also his growing concern for the moral state of Iranian society. His lectures drew students from across Iran. He was not a fiery speaker in those early years, but there was a calm force in his words, a conviction that faith was not passive. To Ruhollah, true religiosity meant resisting injustice, living with integrity, and striving to uplift the downtrodden. The Iran of Khomeini's youth and early adulthood was under the shadow of the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah Pahlavi, and later his son Mohammad Reza Shah, sought to centralize power, modernize society along Western lines, and curtail the influence of the clergy. For Ruhollah, this presented a profound challenge. While he supported progress, he saw the Shah's policies as eroding Iran's moral fabric and undermining the values of Islam. Even as a relatively young cleric, he began to voice his disapproval. His sermons warned against blind imitation of the West, the neglect of the poor, and the growing gap between rulers and people. He built a network of students and fellow scholars who shared his concerns, quietly preparing for a confrontation that, at the time, seemed inevitable. By the time the 1950s arrived, Ruhollah Mousavi Khomeini was no longer just a cleric or a teacher. He had become a symbol. To his followers, he represented the best of his lineage, the courage of his father, Mustafa, who gave his life for justice, the scholarship of his grandfather Ahmad Musavi Hindi, who crossed continents for the sake of faith, the resilience of his distant ancestor Hamza ibn Musa, who stood firm against tyranny. This fusion of traits gave Khomeini an authority that transcended mere scholarship. When he spoke, people listened, not because of his titles, but because his life embodied the values he preached. The story of Ruhollah Khomeini's early life is not just a biography. It is a testament to the power of heritage, education, and conviction. Born in the shadow of his father's martyrdom, raised by a family steeped in learning, and forged in the seminaries of Iraq, Qom, and Najaf, he grew into a scholar whose words would one day spark a revolution. By the time he penned his 40th book and guided his 1,000th student, Khomeini had become more than a teacher. He was the embodiment of a legacy, a man whose roots stretched back to the Prophet Muhammad, whose upbringing was soaked in sacrifice, and whose destiny would be to lead Iran into a new era. By the time Ruhollah Khomeini had become a towering scholar and an unyielding critic of tyranny, his family's journey was far from over. The sacrifices of his ancestors had forged his resolve, but new trials awaited, not only for him, but for his own children. Among them, his eldest son Mostafa Khomeini stood closest by his side, a trusted companion in exile, a confidant, and a fellow bearer of the family's mission. Their path would converge in one of Shia Islam's holiest cities, Najaf, at the very heart of Imam Ali's sanctuary, a place where their lineage found both spiritual refuge and, tragically, another chapter of sacrifice. Najaf is no ordinary city. To Shia Muslims, it is a sanctuary, the resting place of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, the first Shia Imam, and a symbol of justice and courage. For centuries, Najaf has drawn pilgrims, seekers, and scholars from every corner of the Shia world. Its golden-domed shrine is not just a monument. It is a beating heart of spiritual learning, a fortress of resilience where faith is studied, preserved, and lived. It was here, amidst the timeless call of prayer and the hum of theological debate, that Ruhollah Khomeini found his base during his years in exile. And it was here, too, that his eldest son, Mostafa Khomeini, would meet his untimely end. Born in 1930, Mostafa Khomeini inherited his father's intellect, discipline, and quiet strength. He studied in the seminaries of Qom and Najaf, mastering jurisprudence, philosophy, and theology. Yet, unlike many scholars of his generation, Mostafa's role extended beyond the walls of the classroom. When his father was exiled by the Shah's regime in 1964, first to Turkey, then to Iraq, Mostafa became his most steadfast supporter. He was not only a son, he was his father's confidant, messenger, and strategist, ensuring Khomeini's teachings and speeches were transcribed, copied, and smuggled into Iran. The father's voice became the son's mission. Mostafa's presence in Najaf became crucial to the growing revolutionary movement. From this city, they orchestrated a network of students and clerics who spread Khomeini's ideas back into Iran, laying the groundwork for the upheaval that would eventually topple the Pahlavi dynasty. Najaf offered spiritual solace, but life there was not without hardship. Surveillance from Iranian and Iraqi intelligence agencies was constant. Khomeini and Mostafa lived under pressure, their communications monitored, their allies harassed. Yet the shrine of Imam Ali offered them courage. Each day, father and son would pray at the sacred site, drawing strength from the legacy of the Imam, who had himself endured betrayal, conflict, and ultimately martyrdom. For Khomeini, Najaf was more than a place of study. It was a mirror of his family's history, a city that embodied both resistance and sacrifice. In the pre-dawn hours of October 23, 1977, tragedy struck once more for the Mousavi Khomeini line. Mustafa Khomeini, just 47 years old, was found lifeless in Najaf. The circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery. Many believe he was assassinated by the Shah's secret police, SAVAK, working in cooperation with Iraqi intelligence. Others claim his death was sudden and natural, a cruel twist of fate. Whatever the cause, his passing shook the Shia world. Mustafa had been more than a scholar. He was a bridge between his father and the younger clerics, a figure who symbolized continuity in the revolutionary cause. His death ignited grief and anger among Iranians, fueling further unrest against the Shah. Mustafa's body was laid to rest in the sacred soil of Najaf, within the precincts of the shrine of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. To be buried here is an honor beyond measure in the Shia tradition, a testament to both piety and service. His grave became a quiet site of pilgrimage, where followers would come not only to pay respects, but to reaffirm their own commitment to the cause for which he lived and died. For Ruhollah Khomeini, the burial was bittersweet. His son now lay in one of the holiest places in Islam, but his death was another wound in a life marked by sacrifice. Khomeini later referred to Mustafa's passing as a hidden blessing, suggesting that it awakened a greater spirit of defiance among Iranians, accelerating the momentum toward revolution. Najaf became the crucible in which the final stages of Khomeini's leadership were forged. It was here that he sharpened his vision of an Islamic government, expanded his network of allies, and found the spiritual resolve to lead a nation from exile. It was also here that he endured the deepest of personal losses, the death of Mustafa, a son who had been both companion and comrade. Yet just as his father's assassination had planted the seeds of resistance in his own youth, Mustafa's death now strengthened his resolve. From Najaf's golden domes, Khomeini looked beyond Iraq's borders, envisioning a new Iran, one freed from monarchy, guided by Islamic principles, and bound by the legacy of sacrifice that stretched back to Imam Ali himself. Beyond the politics and theology, the story of Najaf is a deeply human one. It is a story of a father and son bound by faith, by struggle, and by an unbroken chain of trials that reached across generations. It reminds us that revolutions are not only forged in speeches and protests, but also in the silent moments of grief at the bedside of a dying son, and in the whispered prayers at a saint's shrine. Mustafa's death did not end the Mousavi Khomeini mission. Instead, it became part of the fabric of their history, a thread woven alongside Mustafa Mousavi's martyrdom and the countless sacrifices of their forebears. From Najaf's sacred ground, that fabric stretched back to Medina, Khorasan, and India, and forward to the streets of Tehran in 1979. By the time Khomeini left Najaf in 1978, driven into exile once more, this time to France, the revolution was no longer just a dream. It was a tide rising fast, fed by decades of injustice, by the sermons and writings of a relentless cleric, and by the blood of martyrs, including his son. From the golden shrine of Imam Ali, where Mustafa rests, the spirit of sacrifice and justice traveled to Iran, igniting a movement that would soon change the nation forever. But what if Mustafa's death was not the end, but the spark? What if from Najaf's sacred ground a movement was born that would sweep across Iran, toppling a monarchy and birthing a new era? Stay with me, because in the next part, we uncover how Khomeini turned grief into a revolution that changed history.